Hi, I'm April Stewart, Country Guide Associate Editor. To complement our numbers-themed magazine this month, we've also put together a digital toolkit, which includes several resources to help your farm stay on top of its finances and help guide and make future business decisions. I was happy to welcome Evan Shout as a guest on this podcast. Evan, also known as the Farmer Coach, specializes in large-scale primary producer grain operations and advises clients on business and risk management through the Farmer Coach program and Maverick Consulting. He's also a CPA and the Chief Financial Officer at Hebert Grain Ventures. As we both know, farming is a complex business full of daily decisions with, definitely we know, million-dollar consequences. What does this mean for farm finance planning from your side of the desk or side of the tractor seat?
Well, I think part of it is, we've got to come to terms that agriculture is not like it used to be. And it's not that we don't respect what's been done in the past. Obviously, we got to where we are today because of the hard work and everything that our past generations have done. But we're a $150 million industry in Canada. There's over 150 million acres in Canada. There's 184,000 farms. We have numbers that are significantly the same as other industries. And I think part of it is that we're starting to act like other industries now. So On the business side, especially, the financial decisions are not small. We're dealing with multi-million dollar decisions, and not just one or two. We're dealing with hundreds throughout the year, if not daily. So on that spec of it, it's become so complex that we've found that farms are starting to struggle, not on growing grain. We've always been good at that. Right. And not on marketing. Yes, marketing's hard, but at the same time, you kind of know the markets and you know where you're at. But it's those financial decisions that are coming at them that all of a sudden those, gut check feelings aren't doing the job anymore. So now what it's come down to is we've had to create systems and processes and people in place and advisors and all these things that were kind of foreign to agriculture in the past. In the past, we were kind of rugged individualists. Now it's come to terms where we know we need help. So I think the biggest thing, especially on the farm finance side and that side of the coin, is that we're starting to see a lot more farms take that next step into becoming a true business. And whether that's hiring, whether that's just putting processes in place. I deal with a lot of small family farms and they always tell me they don't have HR problems. Well, I grew up with two sisters. I know what HR problems are. So I always kid when I speak is that honestly, family farms have bigger HR problems than most companies do. Because there's emotion involved, there's lack of communication, there's all those things that when you move into a large scale corporate entity, you don't have that. You know the processes, you're expected to communicate, you have meetings. Family farms have never had to do that. So that's where I'm starting to see big changes is that they're having meetings, they're bringing their kids into meetings with the accountants and the lawyers and getting them involved early because they do know a succession plan is somewhere in their future, most likely. And it's not starting when the kids are 40 anymore. It's starting when the kids are 17. And the other one is just the amount of roles and responsibilities on a farm. In the past, if dad was an agronomist, guess what the kid took? He took agronomy because I'm going to be the same as dad, right? Mm-hmm. And I found that starting to change really significantly, partially because the succession plan is starting so early, is that they're having discussions on, I'm already the agronomist or I'm already doing this job on the farm. We need you to do something else. We need you to get a business degree or a mechanic degree or, something outside of the norm, because that's the skill set we need on this business. And 12% of farms have a succession plan. And the reason is because dad doesn't want the kid to come back and take his job. Right. That's usually where the communication happens, is that you got two experts in the same field. So we're starting to get down that alley where they understand there's different roles, there's different skill sets, there's a different job for everybody on the farm. We can't fight over the same jobs anymore. Yeah. So that's what I'm
There's so much work. There's more than enough work in a day. There's enough for everybody to have, it doesn't have to be a fancy title, but there can be something for everybody. There can be a role and responsibility for everybody.
Yeah. And as farmers, what we always say is we're really good at finding work. We don't have a problem. We don't have a problem creating work. No. We have a problem finding people and recruiting people and human resources because we've never had to do it before. And we were never taught that. You went to university for an ag degree. There's not an HR course.
No, no, there wasn't.
And most of these farms, we're big enough enterprises that if you looked at if we go to the city and you look at an entity that's got the same revenue generation as a farm does, they've got an HR manager. We've never had that, and we still don't have that on the majority of farms. So how can you be expected to run a team of 5 people or 10 people or, continue to scale? And that's where the issues are coming out. So you're correct. The roles, responsibilities, it's whether you're a family farm or a growing enterprise with, third-party labor, it's figuring out those roles so you're not stepping on each other's feet.
Yeah. And because, like you said, a lot of younger ones, are coming in sooner. And for Country Guide, we actually have a significant amount of our audience are younger farmers. Yep. What would be something you would suggest as a top piece of advice for them to start considering before they get to that stage where, hey, tomorrow I'm taking over, I'm getting the keys?
I think the big one is, and I've said it before, is you're looking for a hand up. You're not looking for a handout. So what I mean by that is the last generation, and don't get me wrong, I love that it happened because it pushed agriculture forward. But because of the real estate evaluations we've had, land literally made farms much more profitable, much more wealthy. And it happened in the last, 10 to 15 years. Now, moving forward, can we expect the same growth? Probably not. And not that I'm saying land won't move, but it's not going to move at the same force as it has in the last 10 years. So in my eyes, the next generation has to get good at farming. Where the last generation, if you could hold on to the land, you probably made quite a bit of money. So I think that's the biggest thing is the next generation coming up, they have to concentrate on actually becoming farmers and business owners and those steps of the process. Because if they're looking for real estate to take them to that next level, it's probably not going to happen at the same rate as it did for their parents.
Yeah.
And the other one is you need to get involved. And what I mean by that is I used to love driving combine. Don't get me wrong. I still have what they call iron disease. I like buying trucks and everything else. But that is a very small portion of what farming is. So I mean, running equipment, being an operator, it's probably the funnest part. And I hate using the word funnest, but it's probably the most enjoyable part. But it's also the lowest on the totem pole in terms of wage. I can find a guy to run a combine. That's not an issue. But finding somebody to make financial decisions on the next land deal or debt restructures or putting processes in place or selling, marketing, those things, those are harder skills. So for me, that next generation, if you really want to make an impact on the farm and have a return, you need to learn those other skills outside of just running equipment. And I mean, the big one for us is we're starting to see technology become a crucial role in most farms, especially on the grain side in Western Canada. And from that, we're looking for technology guys. We're actually hiring for those jobs. Well, guess what? The next generation, they run cell phones way better than I ever could run mine. Right. So I mean, that is a skill set that is kind of up their alley that I think is just untouched. And for us, I mean, every piece of equipment we have has a digital footprint. It has data. It has modems. It's becoming a full-time job. So it's getting outside of the box, I think. We think of farmers as pitchforks and overalls and in the dirt. We're past those years. So the next generation, I think, really has to concentrate on that.
Do you think, these skills that we need, do you think that do they change based on size or sector? Or, as we were saying probably previous to this conversation, business is business. So really those skills are applicable no matter what sector, whether you're east, you're west, no matter what size your farm.
Yeah, I think the key concepts are, I mean, especially when you talk finance, and I'm a recovering accountant, so you're going to get a little bit of finance from me, but, the ratios, the banking, the profitability metrics, the cost of production, all of those things, it doesn't matter what size you are. All it is a scale, right? You're still looking to make so much per acre or so much per head or so much per liter, depending on, what type of farm you run. So, I mean, it's those metrics that don't change. And then from an operations standpoint, there's still roles, there's still responsibilities, there's still processes. So the business side doesn't change. And then like you said, we were talking earlier, a business is a business. Now, when scale comes, does HR change? Yes. You're going to get those bigger teams. So all of a sudden you're going to need probably more communication skills. You're going to need to know how to manage people, performance reviews, all that stuff that comes with scaling. But to tell you the truth, most of the farms I talk to when I'm speaking aren't 40,000 acre farms like ours. They're the family farms that are trying to continue to move and keep up with the industry and make change. So my biggest advice for them was literally those business does not change. Right. If you can get the core business competencies down, that's going to apply no matter what size you are or what scale you are. Yeah, for sure. So we were talking a little bit about land before too.
And you've observed in other conversations that you've had online, because you've had many, many, many conversations, that the Canadian ag sector will see more land change hands over the next decade than any time in history. And more wealth will need to be transitioned or acquired than we have the ability for right now. So for many parts of Canada, also the 2024 crop year was subpar. Cost of production is high. So profit margins are tight. How can farmers prepare not only for the next year, but for maybe even the next decade, if even that's possible? Is there a way to be a strategizing futurist?
Yeah, so I think, there's a few comments with this one. Obviously, and when I make those comments, they're coming off data. So the 2021 census, it was pretty clear 60% of farms were over the age of 55, and that was back 4 years ago. So, let's round it up to 60. And only 10% of farms were actually under the age of 35, which would now be 40. So we essentially have to figure out how to turn 60% of farms into 10. And we have to do that without a whole bunch of consolidation, because obviously the fear is that consolidation, farms get bigger, they get more power. That's kind of the sentiment with most producers and most of the industry. So how do we do that? Well, that's where it comes into play with some of the younger farmers is, first of all, I think we have to push away from acquisitions and into mergers. And I know those are business terms, but it comes with the fact that if we have an oversupply of land and we don't have enough financial backing from the banks to be able to buy all this land, especially from young farmers, how do we start doing, mergers with retiring farmers that gets them to stay in the industry? What I mean by that is, if you'd have sold your land 10 years ago, you'd have been kicking yourself, because 10 years later, that land is 10x. Yeah. Well, it's still probably getting a return. And I think I saw the latest numbers were about 5% in our province over the for the first 6 months of this year. So, it's still probably one of the best investments in Canada that you can own. Yeah. So why would you ever want to sell?
Right.
That's the old joke. The farmer sells all his land, goes into his financial advisor, says, what should I invest in? And the financial advisor looks at him, he says, go buy land. Yeah. So it's that old sentiment of, we're going to have to convince some of these retiring farmers that it's a good investment to stay in the industry and work with these younger farmers. Allow them to come in as a laborer, but not without a career. As a laborer that then works up into a management position, maybe an owner equity position. Even on our farm, my last name's not Hebert, and obviously it's Hebert Grain Ventures is the farm, and I have an equity shareholding. So I'm a third party, but as part of bringing me in, he was competing with other industries. I was a public accountant, so it required that to get me to come back. Now, if you look at it from the flip side, how do you get a young farmer to come back and start working with you? And that's a succession plan. And it doesn't have to be family. That's where we kind of lose it in agriculture. We always think it's a family farm.
Right. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be family. There's lots of young guys out there that want to be farmers that don't have the opportunity, because to start from scratch, it's just not possible. Yeah. So I think that's one of the big ones. On the finance side, the planning, farming, a business just has to have strategies. And what I mean by that is it's looking at your costs, looking at your equity positions. It's all ratio driven. If you have this much profit every year and you can expense this much on owner draws, how much do you have left over for principal payments? We're not talking huge complex decisions. It's sitting down with your accountant and your banker and figuring out what am I prepared for? Because the other thing that we don't realize, and as you said, it's a tough year, especially in Western Canada. We're starting to see drought came through more than we thought it would, the end couple weeks in July. So it's probably what we consider probably another below average to bad year in Western Canada. And by looking at that, you're saying, well, how can we do this? How can you grow in a downturn? Well, downturns are when the opportunities come. And that's kind of a catch-22, you could call it, is that you're losing money, but at the same time, you're going to get more opportunity to grow than you probably did in the past. Because what downturns do is an aging farmer is going to look and say, you know what, the markets are down, costs are up. Why am I putting myself through all this stress and work?
Right.
When I can rent it out, or I can do a merger, or I can sell. So you're going to see more of that exit the industry. But then you're also going to see a whole bunch of other farms that literally just don't want the risk profile. And that always leads to more opportunities. And so for us, and most of the consulting clients we work with, it's the downturns when we want them to be the most prepared, because that's when you're going to see the most opportunities.
Yeah. And I don't think we often think of it enough that way.
Nope.
It's just, we have a negativity bias. So, we're supposed to, as, animals that used to run around the savannah, okay, the bad thing, we have to remember the bad thing because it's going to get us again, So I think it takes like a whole mindset shift to start thinking like that, to keep thinking like that. Are you seeing this becoming more of a thing?
I think part of it is
thinking in this way.
Yeah, and we always joke that farmers have very, very short memories. So what I mean by that is we look at canola price and it's at 14, 15 bucks and we say, oh, that's the new norm. Well, in 2019, we're selling it for $9. So I'm not sure I quite believe the whole new norm, right? And then they'll buy fertilizer 1 year and all of a sudden the price goes down. They're like, well, I shouldn't have bought it. So now I'm going to buy it. And it's those anomalies that actually do the worst decision-making for farms, is because they change their whole mindset when they were doing probably what was right to begin with. So I think what we're starting to see is you're still going to get the guys, you see social media, there's always going to be negative and they focus on that. But I think what we've done is we've broken it down into what can you control and what is out of your control. And I mean, perfect example. We've had a whole bunch of strikes in Canada, whether it's the rail strike, whether it's the port strikes. And all you see is guys say, well, we need the government to step up, or we need this, or we need that. And it's all pessimistic. Well, there's a lot that you can control in that situation. And you can't control that the strike's happening. Right. You can control that you phone your local elevator and try to get as much grain in as you can before it happens. Or you go to the bank and you get your operating line extended because you're not going to be able to sell as much because of logistics. Yeah. Like there's a whole bunch of steps in there that a lot of the pessimism stops. Right. And that to me is where you talk about the business versus lifestyle. A business doesn't just shut down because something bad happened. No. They make a whole bunch of strategies. They go out, they try to do things to mitigate the impact. Where in agriculture, I feel like we always just sit back in our chair and say, well, I can't control that risk. I guess I just got to wait it out. And that's the difference.
And I think that thinking kind of comes from, I've caught myself doing it, and it's more, I think just because the weather has always played such a giant amount and we know we can't control that. So you kind of, that's where your head goes, but you're right. If we kind of start to train ourselves to think, no, wait, stop, pause. Let's see, what can I control in here?
And I mean, we've even seen it with that. I mean, over 5-10 years ago, nobody ever looked at an insurance plan. Like they didn't actually sit down and understand what their government insurance does, what private does. Now, majority of our clients could tell you what they're insured for at what coverage level, when it kicks in. And that's part of what we're seeing is that planning strategy is you say, weather, I can't control it, but you can control all the other factors around it. So you're prepared. Right. So if all of a sudden your yields go down, what your worst case scenario is, know what you're insured to. I mean, for us, I can go into the bank in July and say, you know what, it looks like this for yields. This is where we're probably going to finish the year. Within 10%, I could probably predict a net income figure. And that doesn't matter if it rains, if it doesn't rain, if we get a hailstorm. So it's that planning that, we're talking about with these younger guys is that's where you got to get your next step. You got to get that step into thinking about the what ifs and being prepared for different circumstances, not just sitting there and say, I have no control over anything. Right.
Yeah. And when you're talking about predicting and the what ifs, there are probably many people out there who are a little uneasy about the predicting and the what ifs, and maybe just because they're not comfortable with the number side of it. I'm one of those people. I've trained myself I love numbers. They're fascinating. Not a math fan, but knowing the numbers is so critical. So for the people who kind of maybe shy away from the numbers and maybe just kind of, oh, my accountant will tell me, or, whatever, what would be 1 or 2 or 5 things that would be the most important for them to learn and kind of get down pat? If they don't worry about anything else, what should they know?
So I think number one, and I mean, I don't think many would disagree with me, cost of production has to be number one. And when I say cost of production, it's just take your statements from last year, look at what you spent on everything. You kind of know where your fertilizer kicks out. I mean, most guys, as farmers, we talk in terms of yield and what does our fertilizer cost? Those are the 2 big ones. If I asked any farmer, they probably have an idea on. So you pop those into your same as your financials last year. And all of a sudden you have a round number. And I'm just looking for estimates. You don't have to, I mean, when it comes to cost of production, nobody's going to be bang on. But at least then when you break it down on, if I grow an average yield, which you're getting off your insurance or your 10-year average, you put that into your cost of production, all of a sudden it bangs out a price that says you need to sell for this. So now you've got your marketing plan because I need to sell for this to make money.
Right.
You've got your cost of production. So you know that, oh, my costs are really high and I can't make this much. I got to start cutting costs. And all of a sudden you're looking down to say, where do I actually pull back?
Yeah.
So I think cost of production is number one, because I mean, the stats out of TPAP, which is the Texas A&M course for executive producers in the US,
okay,
60% of farms market without actually knowing what their costs are.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, I mean, when we talk business, that's a big red flag, is that most farms that we work with, and not we work with, but most farms in Canada and the US are marketing without actually knowing what their margin is. So that's a red flag. So that would be my first start. The second one is cash flow. I mean, cash is king. We've heard that term many times.
Yep.
And I mean, in agriculture especially, because if you think about it, we actually, most guys would say we have a 12-month growing season, you know, January, December, or if you want to shrink it down, it's May to October.
Right.
But the truth is, from a business standpoint, we actually have about a 24-month window. Because especially in grain farming, and I'm going to talk from the grain farm here for this side, but we buy our inputs the summer before and we sell the majority of our grain the summer after.
True.
So when you're planning cash flow, if you're just planning a 12-month, calendar year, you're already missing, because it's a 24-month season when it comes to a grain crop. So for us, we start the cash flow back in July when we buy the inputs, where are we going to be throughout each month. So for farms, what they can do is just figure out what your monthly burn rate is. And the definition of your burn rate is how much cash outflow goes every month. Because if you understand that, then when you talk about marketing, you know what month you need to sell, because I know I'm going to spend $200,000 in May. My bank account is already at a negative. I know I've got this much room. I have to sell X. So I think cash flow is the other one that a lot of guys miss out on, because I mean, that's gives you power. You can purchase your inputs when they hit the lowest or when you think they're in the lowest, and you can hold your grain. So right now, for example, harvest pressure, worst time to sell.
Yeah.
So if you have cash flow, you can hold until you see the prices hopefully move in the direction you want them to.
Yeah.
So cost production and cash flow are probably the two biggest ones. The other ones are your ratios. And I mean, this one, guys are going to struggle, because you're right. Most farms don't like talking numbers. They like talking yields. But your bankers, I mean, you're not even paying your bankers. Let's be serious. Your bank works for you. They will give you your printout of your ratios. So if you go into your bank and say, you know what, I kind of want to know where things are at, they're not charging you for that. They're just giving you a printout. Where obviously if you go to your accountant or you get a third-party advisor like us, there's a fee.
Right.
But for young guys who are trying to save money, or even older guys who don't want to pay the fee, your bank has these numbers, because every year they look at your loans, they have to run all these numbers.
Okay. So, that's a good tip.
so I think the big one is just get the numbers, because if you get the numbers, you kind of know where you're sitting from a financial perspective, because it used to be farmers wanted to be debt-free. And honestly, in today's environment, that's probably not going to happen, especially if you're trying to grow, or even if you're just trying to be complacent, you're probably still got some debt on the books.
Yeah.
And then the thing you got to remember is the number on the balance sheet for debt isn't what bothers me. It's not what keeps me up at night. As long as the key ratios, whether it's the debt service, which is the amount you can repay, your debt to equity, do you have enough assets to cover the debt, and working capital, which is your cash position. If those three ratios are good, it really doesn't matter what the number on the statement says. I mean, you look at big businesses in Toronto or New York, they could have $1 billion worth of debt.
Right.
Their CEOs are sleeping just fine. Trust me.
Right. Yeah.
And they're sleeping fine because they know the other ratios are in line and they know they can pay their bills. And so that's the one thing I think I would say is we have a lot of stress in this industry. Make sure that the stress isn't just because you're not educated enough to know what position you're in. Make sure that you actually are comfortable with those ratios, because those are what's going to keep you moving forward.
Yeah.
It's not how much debt you have on the books.
No. Yeah. No, that's all super, super advice. And you know what? Sometimes it's just, we need to rehear it. Maybe some of this conversation, people are like, yeah, I know it. But then, they're heading out to do the next chore, and they're thinking about it, and they're like, oh yeah, you know what? I should probably check into this, or I should probably go back to doing that, or yeah. So any other big hot tip that we should know before we
big hot tips? Trying to think. I'm gonna look over for a few of my notes I jotted, but
I mean, all of these were great. Like even if I take my Country Guide editor hat off for a second and put my farm hat on, I'm like, this was super helpful conversation. So I know it will be for many other people listening.
I think the big one, and I mean, it goes back to most of us got into farming for the lifestyle, and I'm going to rehash some of what we talked about already, but the lifestyle, I mean, growing up on the farm, riding in machines, you know, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you've gone, whether you're still involved in agriculture or not, you remember growing up on a farm. Yeah. So when I say treat it like a business, not a lifestyle, that's not me saying forget those, you know, those early mornings with dad in the combine. What that's saying is that if you really want a great farming lifestyle, the business has to be in place first. Yes. Because you can't be on the farm if there's no money to be made. So I think that's the big one, I think, is we get a lot of pushback on those lines, is that, you know, we got into farming because we love the lifestyle. We don't want to, you know, we don't want to run the multi-million-dollar business. You're kind of already in it. So I think that's probably the biggest one, is get used to that. And the other one is, the numbers might scare people, but get advisors involved and have discussions and be involved in communication, and, you know, have all those things you need to know on your side, because the more information you can have, it takes that gut check away. Because when you make decisions, I want people making decisions based on knowledge, based on facts, based on data, not just, you know, finger in the air, is it going to rain? And and that's easy to do once you have the processes in place. So that comes back to the business side. So
yeah. And it's a lot easier to do these days than it was even 5, maybe 10 years ago. There's kind of almost no excuse. We're like in data overload.
I can run my combine from my cell phone. Right. I promise you we can do this.
Yeah. Well, this was great, Evan. Thank you so much.